designated as tax map 48.8, lot 2, lot 48. Property is located within the B1 zoning district, as well as the National Register of Historic District and the village's local historic district. In addition to taking comments on the application for a certificate of appropriateness on the proposal, the board will also take comments on any potential significant adverse environmental impacts as part of its determination of significance required under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SEQRA. Application materials, including the SEQRA documents and revised plans, may be inspected at the Village of Cold Spring Clerk's Office located at 85 Main Street, Cold Spring, New York, 10516 during normal business hours, or online at www.coldspringnewyork.gov. So with that, we will follow the same process. We will ask the applicant to make a presentation. We'll take a comment from our consultant concerning the SEQRA Type 1 finding. And with that, I'll turn it over to Karen.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Karen Parks, and I'm here tonight with Glenn Watson from Beatty & Watson, Surveying and Engineering, and Mike Carr, Professional Engineer, and Sue Costigan, the property owner of 126 Main Street. And as Al mentioned, we have two applications before the Historic Review Board. We have an application for permission to demolish the existing structure and an application for new construction on the site. And as well, we're discussing the SEQRA review process tonight, as well as for part of the public hearing. So just to, and also just one more thing to add, we're also undergoing a coordinated review with both the Planning and Zoning Board, Planning Board for site plan approval, and the Zoning Board for a special use permit for the placement of the building at the front property line. So just to give you a little background of how we got here. Sue bought the property a little over a year ago, maybe close to a year and a half ago, and she and I began discussions about the property, and the initial intent was for her to renovate the building to house her business, which will be a yarn shop. And the intention was to both renovate and potentially add on one or two additions to the rear of the building and or the easterly side of the structure to better accommodate the goals for the new business. So we looked carefully at how we might do that, at the building itself, at the site. We're fortunate to have a site that could accommodate building additions that wouldn't require variances in terms of setbacks, coverage, height, any of those restrictions. And we also are lucky to have a site that can accommodate off-street parking, which is, as we all know, a big issue within the village. So we began to look at different options for renovation of the building, and as we began to look more thoroughly at that, it became clear that the condition of the existing building is quite poor in many facets, foundation and existing structure. So we asked Mike Carr to come and look at the building and give his assessment. And some of the issues that we were confronting in terms of structure and the existing building were poor and deteriorating condition of the foundation, which is a combination of brick, stone, concrete masonry units where historic openings had been patched and filled, and some formed concrete, again, where a new opening had been created at some point in time for a stair access to the basement. In addition, the wood sills along a good portion of the exposed sides of the building on the east and the northerly sides are close to or actually under grade, And as a result, they've also experienced a fair amount of decay from moisture absorption. So at time, you know, I'm sure the building wasn't constructed that way originally, but as grades change and things fill in around the building, that occurs. And so not only has that caused deterioration to exterior sills, but also the floor joists at the ground floor level, the ends of the joists that are also attached to those sills have over time absorbed water and were exhibiting signs of decay, as well as cracks in the joists and things like that. There was also a fair amount of issues with the heavy timber framing throughout the building, either cracks or breaks in the framing or areas where they've been significantly cut and removed to accommodate modifications to the structure over time. And then one of the major issues that we were confronting was the proximity of the building to its immediate neighbor at 124 Main Street, which is known as the Silver Spoon Restaurant. So the two buildings in those locations are actually not adjoined, but about 6 inches apart. And the space between those buildings has, over time, become a bit of a water dump. And there have been inadequate attempts to prevent water from getting into that space. And over time, both buildings have experienced a serious amount of deterioration and decay between the structures. And that was actually visible in some areas, and later when we exposed more interior surfaces, it became even more apparent how existing, perhaps original siding on the structure was rotting and actually falling off of the framing down into the crevice. And both property owners have experienced water coming in the space and going into their buildings and basements. So this is something that has been occurring for quite some time, and there is no simple solution. I mean, water and drainage can be addressed, but addressing the damage that's already occurred between the buildings is a bigger issue. And how do we get access to actually rectify those situations and maintain them in the future? So that was kind of one of the biggest problems. So just to give you a sense of the layout of the existing structure, it's a 2-story building with retail on the first floor, which was formerly known as Carolyn's Flower Shop, and a single dwelling unit on the second floor. So the first floor accommodated the retail space, and the second floor accommodated the apartment. The proposed use for the site is the same. Sue would like to have her yarn shop on the first floor, and the plan is to have a single dwelling unit on the second floor. So the use for the property has not changed, and in terms of impact to parking and circulation, we don't expect a large change in that regard. The building itself as it exists, there is what we assume to be an original core of the structure, which has a full basement, albeit with low ceilings and a dirt floor, and then 2 subsequent additions to the property, the one which is between the building and the Silver Spoon structure, and then a later addition at the back of the property. And so after kind of discussing the structure and looking at our options, and looking at different portions of the building and how we might potentially save portions of the building and work around it, we really came to the conclusion that in modifying it and trying to address current code issues, fire safety, fire separation, that it was becoming more and more of a challenge, nearing impossible to work with the existing building. So that's when we came to the Historic Review Board and started our applications. And we submitted applications both for demolition and new construction to the building inspector, so we could get the appropriate referrals to all of the boards as needed. So when we began the process, with the Historic Review Board, they asked us to initially look into, provide more information about the history of the building and, also a structural assessment and really delve into the historic fabric of the structure. So we started to determine the history of the building, we really drew from historic maps and photographs initially, and then also consulted a historic preservation consultant. The maps that we were working with, or that we were able to find, the earliest of which was recorded in 1853, does show a structure on the property, and it's noted on the property that it was a bakery. So we know that the structure existed at least in 1853, and likely before. A second map that we were able to obtain, actually these two maps, first in 1854 O'Connor map, and then an 1867 Beers map were obtained from the Putnam History Museum. And the O'Connor map is not really definitive. It shows structures in the approximate location of the site, however, it's rather vague. A lot of the cross streets off of Main Street aren't illustrated on the map, so it's really just an assumption of what building might actually refer to ours. However, the 1867 Beers map does again definitively show a building on the property, and on that map it's actually notated as a store. Okay, so then with the help of Kathleen Foley, who provided us her copies of the Sanborn maps. Sanborn maps are fire insurance maps that were produced over periods of time and updated during sequences of years to show additions to buildings and whatnot. So we have a series of maps dating from 1887 to 1905, all of which show buildings on the site. And what's interesting is there were actually quite a number of additions off of the back of the building, and what we understand to have been a detached barn structure as well. And there was also a full-length porch along the front of the structure which ran the full length of the building, unlike what exists now, which is a covered stoop at one end of the building. So those are present in all of the renditions of the Sanborn maps. The one thing that was of note as we were kind of dissecting the history of the building and how it may have evolved was the addition of the two-story bay window structure, which appeared, was not on the 1887 map, but appeared on the 1897 map. So that helped us a little bit with the dating of that portion of the building. So in addition to looking at historic maps, oh, by the way, on all of these maps, the building is noted as a bakery. So it stayed in business for some years, it must have been successful. So we also looked at historic photographs from various sources. The first photograph, which was dated from approximately 1872, was provided by Carolyn from the board. These are actually really fantastic photos of Main Street back in the day when we still had dirt roads running down Main Street. But the building is depicted very similar in shape to the way it exists now. It has a parapet facade on the front, the gable roof running perpendicular to Main Street, and it actually does illustrate the full porch along the front of the facade. And another really effective and useful photo was from a postcard, a Delzell postcard, and it's dated around the turn of the century. It also illustrates the full porch on the front facade, and the parapet isn't illustrated, however, we assume that it's there given that it's on the lower photos and they're dated around the same time. This photo dated approximately 1890s, just shows a small glimpse of the building at the far end. This we got from the Putnam History Society, History Museum rather, and the dating they provided was approximate based on a couple of major snowstorms that, were recorded and they actually had photographs of in that time period. So again, we're dating the building around 1850 or so based on maps and photographs. Okay, so as the building evolved, we have some later photos. These are building structure inventory forms prepared by the State Historic Preservation Office. And the first one that we have recorded from 1975 actually shows that we no longer have the full front porch, but now have the covered front stoop as it exists today. It also shows, again, the parapet facade in existence and a different window layout. The upper windows appear to be the same as they exist today, but on the first floor, we also had individual double hung windows versus the bow window that exists today. So a later rendition of the survey form was done around the early 1980s, at the time that the survey for creating the Cold Spring Historic District was underway. At that time, they did a survey of all the buildings on Main Street, all of the contributing buildings that would become part of the National Historic District. So in this rendition, again, we're seeing slow transitions of how the building evolved. Now we have the bow window in the front as it exists today. It appears that the original, or at least old, I'm not sure they're original, but the old 2/2 double hung windows were still in place. As we know now, those have all been replaced with newer windows. And this is just another photo where we just get a glimpse of that structure. Again, this was part of the survey for the creation of the Cold Spring Historic District. So in addition to, well, I might as well show you as it is now. So we have, as you know, vinyl siding throughout the building. All of the exterior windows have been replaced. We have a newer door on the easterly side of the structure. And the front door appears to be, if not original, very old, possibly during one phase of the earlier additions. So in addition to the photos and the maps that were used to date the building, we also, later in this process, worked with a historic preservation consultant, Carla Cielo. And she came to the property and also looked at things with a much more educated eye in terms of wood construction styles, how the woods were sawn, the nails used, the fastening techniques, and she was able to give us more accurate descriptions of the age of the building. So through her research, what she found was she dated the original core of the building to be between about 1840 and 1850. So we were pretty close based on the maps and the photographs. She dated the addition between the main core and the Silver Spoon to approximately 1865, as well as the two-story bay structure. That doesn't necessarily coincide with the Sanborn maps, but I'm sure there's room for differences there. So she had dated those around the same time, and because of the extension here, she also indicated that it was likely that the Italianate features, the parapet facade, was added at that time. So it wasn't likely part of the original core structure, but added to potentially cover the different roof lines that would then be being created. And then the later addition at the back of the building, she dated to about 1890. So that gives us a little bit of background about the history of the structure. So the next, or coinciding with our historic research, we also had site visits with the members of the Historic Review Board. And initially, we looked at portions of the structure that we had exposed and pointed out the structural issues that I mentioned previously. And then the board asked if we could also remove some of the exterior siding to potentially reveal whether there was original siding or historic fabric beneath the vinyl. And as a part of that process, we also opened up some interior walls so that might shed some light on how the building evolved, and also further illustrate the poor condition of the original heavy framed structure. So that was a really eye-opening experience. The removal of the vinyl siding indicated beveled clapboard siding that was likely put on, well, it appears that it's on the 1975 inventory form, but in any case, it was clearly not an original siding that was still in place, and it appeared to have no more than 2 coats of paint, and then was later covered with vinyl. So there was no original siding under that wood siding. On the back of the structure, under the vinyl, we also found asbestos shingle siding as well as a novelty wood siding, none of which were found to be original historic fabric. As I mentioned previously, all windows and doors have been replaced. What we did assume are original, or at least part of the very early addition, are the front cornice brackets, which exist today, as well as the brackets at the bay window and much of the wood trim around the bay window. There is vinyl siding at the bay window as well, but some of the wood trim under the ivy is still in place. As we went into the interior of the building, what we realized is the framing, the original framing of the structure had experienced quite a bit of deterioration from water damage and potentially dry rot, but also had been heavily modified with alterations to the structure over the years, changes in window openings, door openings, removal of interior partitions. So a lot of cross bracing, a lot of headers, a lot of the structural framing had been cut and compromised. Beams through the center of the structure were cut to accommodate new chimneys up through the middle of the building. So when all was said and done, what came out of that that study and the examination of the existing structure was that there is very little historic fabric remaining. Certainly no historic fabric remaining on the exterior of the building, but even on the interior, the frame of the building had been modified to such an extent that very little of the historic fabric was remaining. Okay. So then, to continue our conversation and our request to demolish the building, part of that was beginning to present plans for the new construction and also begin the secret process. So those were kind of happening simultaneously, but the presentation of the new building was a very important aspect of that, because one of the biggest environmental impacts was going to be the loss of this historic structure in the National District. So what we were proposing was going to be our mitigation of that loss. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the proposed building and the site, and then ask Glenn to talk a little bit about the secret review. So our proposed building, again, as we talked about, the use is going to remain the same, with a retail space on the first floor and a single dwelling unit on the second floor. One of the major changes to the site would be our proposal to pull the new building away from the Silver Spoon building by about 5 feet. So not only will that allow us to clearly, you know, it'll allow Jimmy to maintain his building, but also allow us to create some fire separation and not recreate a situation where we're gonna have water damage again. So both buildings will ultimately benefit by that separation and that they can be maintained. In addition, the building itself is slightly larger than what's there. The existing building is about 2,100 square feet, and the proposed building is about 2,880 or so. So we are proposing a slightly larger building, however, we still are well within, all of our zoning requirements in terms of setbacks and coverage. And, yeah, I'll jump just to the elevations. Okay, so one of the things to consider when designing a new building in a historic district, are how to incorporate new construction, amid a fabric of older buildings. And there is a document, the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And that actually covers everything from restoration to new construction or reconstruction. And the basic concept of those standards is that when you're building new construction, the intent is not to mimic what's there or replicate what's currently there, and not to trick people into thinking that this building is 170 years old like the original, but rather to incorporate a structure into the environment that is sensitive to the defining features of the existing building, that's sensitive to the buildings around it and the overall environment, and is also of a scale and material and massing that will fit in with the district. So that often can be at the discretion of historic review boards in different municipalities, and people have different views about that, and boards have different views. But it seems that the views of this board do align with those standards, and that we're not, trying to replicate what's there, but creating a new building that we hope will fit within the district. So keeping that in mind, as we've worked for many months with the Historic Review Board, our response to what they've described as important features are maintaining the parapet facade on the front of the building, maintaining a 2-story bay window unit, and also trying to maintain the roof line, the gable roof line, which runs perpendicular to Main Street. That's actually very different than many of the structures on Main Street, so it is a unique and defining feature to this site. So in the design of the new structure, we've tried to incorporate those items. We've also tried to design a building that is sensitive to the scale of both the buildings nearby and on the street as a whole, and incorporate details that are in keeping with those in the district, and the use of materials. So the siding that we're proposing is a clapboard siding with an 8-inch exposure that we feel is closer to what might have been on the original building. We're looking to bring back 2 over 2 windows on the upper stories and on the side of the structure. We're also going to make an effort, as was suggested by the consultants from the village, that we try and reuse some of the historic features wherever feasible, and some of those that seemed to be in good shape and warranted reuse were the cornice detail and the dental molding on the front facade, which we're proposing to reuse, as well as the brackets and any salvageable trim that we might be able to reincorporate on the bay window. And those seem to be in good shape. We won't know until we actually get into it whether they'll be salvageable, but at this point there's no reason to assume that they wouldn't be. We'd also like to try to incorporate some of the brick in the building to, clad the proposed chimney, and we think that that may be feasible. This chimney would not be structural, I mean, it will come from the ground up, but the brick won't be exposed in the interior of the structure, so really we're talking about using, brick from the building, just from the roof penetration up. And our proposal is to create a storefront, again, that's more in keeping with the storefronts throughout Main Street. So it's much different from what the building currently has, but we also feel it's much more appealing and inviting for a retail business to draw people in and to offer a visual into the store and benefit the business in that way. With the new construction, we'll also be able to provide an accessible building, which is very important to us. So in terms of its relation to the other buildings and how it relates to the existing streetscape and our proposed streetscape, the existing building, as you know, is right up against the Silver Spoon, and the street goes uphill. And then 238, of course, is a taller structure and farther up the hill. And we have a void where we have essentially a wide vacant lot between the buildings. And in addition to the width of our lot, also there's a driveway space on the left side of 138 Main Street. So we feel that our proposal for the new building actually works nicely with that opening, and the height increase is actually a sensible kind of continuation of the streetscape on that side of the street. So we have the opportunity to raise the height a little and raise the width a little and pull it away from the Silver Spoon building. We've also created a small extension in the back, and that will actually, not only does it provide more usable floor space for both the retail and apartment, but it also acts as screening to the parking that will be located behind the building. Okay. So lastly, again, these are just elevations to better illustrate the concept for how the building will tie into the streetscape. And again, our hope is to be able to incorporate some softscape at the front and side of the building, and to offer a little bit more of an intimate scale and landscaping, and tie it into the streetscape. Okay, I'm just quickly gonna talk about the site layout. Okay, so we have Main Street here, the Silver Spoon structure and our proposed structure, and then 138 Main Street. So we're proposing to pull the structure about 5 feet off of the existing Silver Spoon structure. That will leave about a 5-foot private alleyway accessing the back of the site, and the access will remain where it currently exists, and will come in off of Main Street and have our parking to the rear of the site along with 2 parallel spaces in this area. So we have a total of 8 spaces here and 2 here, totaling 10. We're providing an accessible parking space and access lane adjacent to the back of the building. The site details we're gonna cover with the planning board. We have a public hearing with them March 1st, but one of the important changes through our meetings with the different boards is that we're proposing a pervious parking surface throughout the majority of the parking area. The only paved section will be the accessible parking space and access lane, as well as sidewalks around the building. And we're proposing a planting bed and in the front and along the street to soften that transition. Okay, and then actually, I'll just talk quickly about lighting because I think that's important in terms of neighbors. So even though our property is in the B1 district, it's a deep lot and it's actually surrounded on all sides by residential properties. So, 238, though it's in the business district, is a residential use. So, so we're proposing fencing along the, along both property lines, and we're not proposing new fencing along the back. There is a current intact fencing that, the design for our fencing is in keeping with. So we're not proposing fencing there. If and when that goes, we'll work with the neighbor to address that. The lighting for the property that we're proposing, we have lighting at the parking area, garden lighting, and building lighting. So the lighting at the parking area that we're proposing is bollard style lighting, which is dark sky friendly. We've chosen fixtures. The approximate total height is about 43 inches, and the lighting is directed both down and into the site. So the lighting, even though we have fencing along the property line, the lighting will not be directed to the outside of the property. All of the lighting is directed in. We also have a lighting layout that shows the progression of the light, and really the lighting is designed to just light the parking spaces, and then we'll have building lighting to illuminate the path around the building. So the building lighting, again, we've selected fixtures that are less of an architectural statement, but more are really providing a residential scale lighting, even though this is a business use. And that, we're proposing lighting at the back entry, 2 lights along the alley, and 2 lights along this side of the building so that we can illuminate the path to the front door. At the side entry and at the front door, we have roof overhangs. The side has a small porch overhang, and we're proposing recessed lighting in that area. At the front of the building, we also have the detailed cornice overhang at the storefront, where we're proposing recessed lighting, most of which will be directional to illuminate a sign on the front panel. And then we have some small lighting fixtures. Again, they're about 10 inches in height, and those are to illuminate the garden pathway. Okay. Fencing, and again, we'll talk about this in more detail with the planning board, but we're proposing a 6-foot high fence. It would have a solid 5-foot panel below with a 1-foot picket above. So hopefully that upper part will help open. This is an image of the style of fencing we'd be using. And we also have a landscape plan, which is conceptual, but we are proposing to take down trees on the site. The larger trees are the Norway maples, which are considered somewhat of a weed tree, and then we'll be re-landscaping to provide some softscape. And we also feel the pervious paving will be a benefit as well. Okay, so I think that's it. I just wanted to add, I forgot to mention before, but the Historic Review Board, as they did with 35 Market Street, has worked with the AKRF as their consultant, and AKRF also had a sub-consultant, Silman Engineering, who was a structural engineer. And they as well as Carla Cielo, the historic preservation consultant, have all concurred with our findings about the lack of structural integrity, the lack of historic fabric in the building, and felt that with selective salvage of certain features, both the exterior features that I discussed, but also some interior elements, that it would lessen the, it would mean that the loss is less significant by losing the building. And some of the interior features that I'm referring to that we will try to incorporate into the building in some way, but if we're not able to, items that can be salvaged, we'll certainly try and, you know, recycle in some other way to another user potentially. That would include some of the interior framing. There are radiators, sinks, interior doors, which we're actually hoping to reuse. The front door, we're actually hoping to incorporate on the interior of the building as, separation in the storefront. So we're really gonna make every effort we can to bring pieces of the building as we know it now into the new structure. So I think that kind of describes the project, and I just wanted to ask Glenn if he had any comments to make regarding our SECR application.
I want to mention you had Jay Brennan also.
Right, we also had a local woodworker, Jay Brennan, come to the property and look at, the framing of the structure to discuss the feasibility of reusing it. And he certainly confirmed that there are nice specimens within the framing, some of which might be salvageable and others might not. Some have significant cracking. So he did acknowledge that it is possible to reuse the, certain members, but it could come at a great cost, so.
You'll all remember that we submitted a part one, which required a few corrections, which we took care of. You did part two, and we went to work and produced the full EAF part. We produced part three, incorporating parts one and two. I put the site plan up to just remind me of a couple of mitigations. You identified at some point along the way the possibility of flooding and the possibility of erosion. One of these plans is an erosion control plan. The erosion control plan is set up in such a way as to trap sediment from being washed through the property. It's set up to protect the stream. It's set up to protect the little bit of planted area that we have in the back. What's really pretty unique about this thing, at least in my experience, is that this site is virtually all impervious surface right now, and we're going to turn it into most of it is going to be pervious soil. So that's one major mitigation with regard to flooding. We basically are shedding all of the water to the back, or the vast majority of the water to the back. This open cross-hatched area represents a surface, a pervious surface. So we're going to be taking out the impervious material, making basically a kind of a reservoir filled with gravel with lots of voids in it, and then covering it with a recycled plastic product that will hold gravel in place. It will hold the vehicles in place, and it will capture the water and hold the water. So we actually have provided the calculations here, and by doing that, we are actually going to improve the situation. Karen mentioned the space between the two buildings. That's going to be, besides a walkway, under the walkway, there's going to be a French drain to capture the water that's dropping down and bringing it to the back of the property through a French drain, and it will exit near the back of the property. Although that will be some additional flow, but still nets out to a significant improvement in the situation. A little bit, I'm going to very quickly talk about the dismantling of the building, and I just want you to play back in your head the discussion you had about an hour and a half ago about this dismantling of the building, journal, photographing the building as it's being dismantled. That's also discussed in the EAF as a mitigation to maintain what information we can about the existing building. Moreover, if you look at Carla Cioli's report, in one of the appendixes, is probably 70 or 80 pictures of the situation, documenting not only the structural problems with it, but some of the historic features that she found in the building. And her report is, she's got a fairly decent credential, and she's quite an expert. So that is very similar mitigation. We don't expect there'll be any traffic impacts. The removal of the building will certainly have a temporary impact. We talked about energy. When the building is being taken down, and when it's being rebuilt, there certainly will be an increase in the energy. But because we are going to be incorporating, newer, better insulation, newer, better windows, newer, more efficient heating plant, I think we'll have a net decrease in the use of energy. We don't expect there'll be any increase in traffic. We don't expect we'll be causing any permanent problems. We don't think we'll be causing any problems with traffic on the street. The mitigation there is very simply during demolition and construction, the site has to be kept clean. We made a commitment to do that. There will be some concrete, which is also entered into the calculation. The only concrete will be the walkways immediately around the building and the handicap parking space, because well, you can use that. It's gonna just make it easier for people. The air conditioners are located in the back and out of sight. There was a concern with regard to archaeology. We did have an archaeological study done that was found to be largely filled area, and nothing was found that would require any further work, archaeological work. So we think we're clean on that regard. One of the major things that we had with regard to the timing of this whole thing was when we first got the letter from the DEC, they said we could only cut the trees down from November 1st to November 30th. And frankly, I thought that was a mistake, but when I talked to them, that wasn't a mistake. The normal cutting trees is from November 1st to March 31st, when the bats are gone and not trying to roost in the trees, but the possible wintering of the bald eagles and the cutting of trees disturbs them as well, so that narrows the window significantly. So we started looking at that, and you'll find that in part 3 of the EAF. DEC also provided guidelines with regard to that, and they told us that the site for the eagles is about 0.42 miles away, and they told us that the major thing was eagles seeing us. So we did some profiles to show that the buildings across the street were on that sight line. We measured the distance, and we were something like 300%, 3 times the recommended, the federal guideline for bald eagle protection was 660 feet. We're more than 3 times that distance away from the site. And we presented that to them. They also made a point that they wanted what they call a TOI, or time of year restriction on building, which was from April 1st to November 1st, I believe. The actual dates are in there if I have them incorrect. We agreed to that restriction. This is for outside work. So what our target is to get the building down, to get the structure up so that the work can continue after that deadline inside, which is why we're as concerned with the April 1st start as we are. So we had So we agreed to the time of year restriction, and that's a mitigation that's presented to you. The letters from DEC invited us to submit this additional material. We did submit the additional material. And what do I do with that? Over here. And we did get a response from them. I think this was emailed to you, but if I could hand it up, they did respond to us, that we could cut the trees, that there's only, I think, 3 trees to be cut. We could cut them, but we had to cut them in March and preferably towards the end of March. So again, so we've shown adequate mitigation with regard to the eagles by showing that our distance is significant, in terms of how much is significantly more than is required in terms of how far we should be from them, and then agreeing to the time of year construction limitation. I'm sure there's a couple of others in here, but I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if there are.
All right, thank you. Ashley, can you speak for the consultants hired by the village?
Yes. So we received the application back in October, and it was at that time, it was the site plan dated August 22nd, 2017, and we reviewed the EAF and provided comments. It was reviewed by myself, one of ACAREF's engineers, as well as one of ACAREF's historians. We provided comments to the applicant and included some revisions to the Part 1. We provided comments on the EAF Part 2, and we included some recommendations on what should be included in the Part 3, including following up with the EC, as well as recommending that a Phase 1A archaeological assessment be provided, and that was discussed with this board back in November. So those documents were provided back in last month, in January. We reviewed all of those documents and provided the board with a new memo, which was on January 30th. And in that, we found that all of the comments, or most of the comments that we had asked to be addressed in regards to seeker had been sufficiently addressed. We did have some follow-up comments that we felt could be dealt with by the planning board during site plan review. It does appear that they have since provided those documents. So we have not had a chance to comment on those in regards to their site plan adequacy, but they were sufficient as of January for seeker purposes.
So that relates to the,
So the calculations, for example, that he mentioned, our engineer has not had a chance to review the calculations.
Okay, thank you.
I just also,
So-
when I hand in the notices.
Yes,
and,
yes, that's true.
And also, I have some of our presentation documents, copies of those, and the front facade,
Thank you. So with that, what we'll do is take, since it's already late, 5 minutes. Everybody who would like to take a closer look at the documents here and on the table, please do, and then we'll begin the public comment section.
do you have elevations that are like comparing the eastern facing? I mean, I see that you have this sort of angled drawing of what it looks like looking at it from the east, but earlier you held up one that had it had sort of a comparison of what is there now and what it will look like.
so, well, this is
You
the
can
new.
ask me
This is new.
This is
Yeah.
the meeting,
This to the side. Oh, okay.
get some rooms that,
So that's what through them.
Can you check planning board tomorrow?
Third pages that need to be done? So
They're talking about this stuff again. Talking to Karen, and she was like,
Because it's coloring about the houses.
It's like a really boring, particularly like sad municipal color.
Shades of
the
grandy.
agenda just says, going over things in advance of the
Aluminum
public
siding.
hearing. The last meeting, they did that.
Pretty cold, that's not allowed in the district. It would be
I'm
hard
hoping
with a
it
lot
will
of
be short.
rules.
This one.
Here, take that.
And so did you also,
No, I
I don't think she had these in
No,
this.
it's-
These are a little more fleshed out.
did you, decide on the,
Well, they need to, as with 35 Market, they had the secret dealt with, which
Does
we're
it?
tonight. That is a good thing.
And this is the lighting pattern, actually,
I write it down and I forget all
so
about it.
basically,
That's why I
at about 5 to 6 feet from the structure, you're at 1 foot candle and. So again, we're doing that. So that. At the end of the light, this is about 1 foot candle and specifically the space is giving you
it's not drawing specific,
and then there's no light really.
like, it's not in my, it hasn't.
These are really those they're really intended to kind of just guide the separation, this light pathway. So we felt like the 30 inch, we just don't know, we don't want these to be more like shrubs, so we don't want shrubs. So that would be yeah, I mean, actually, like lighting in the landscape can be really, so that's really straight.
Excuse me.
Like it never happened.
So we'll be discussing all of this. Basically, there's no backlight, the light is off.
I never even, I think it was open, like.
Any
other meetings this week?
This is split down.
This is my only night meeting. I have an early morning meeting. I have 3 in a row next week.
At the final.
Doesn't have a light.
Actually,
He doesn't live, he's in
Right, as do these neighbors looking that way,
Did you live on
About an hour and 20 minutes. I live in Seattle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I kind of have to take back roads and cut across the county. I go up through Concord, cross 35, and then come up to Taconic, and then cut through Fontborough. I found that was faster than coming through
So where's your office?
using bike lanes.
Where's the package that
Yeah.
now brought in?
Yeah, yeah.
It used to be like front of those roads, but it's further than that.
Me too.
this is Steve that
It's somewhere like 50/50, and
What we're trying to make
with
sure.
our office doing more, we need to start with our city office. City office. Typically, there's a lot of securities,
This is the
a lot of state agencies.
But this is just the front elevation. This doesn't have the rest.
Yeah, we do have a lot of coffee. Oh, yeah, that's great. That's the Dennis reference.
It is.
That's
It
definitely.
is like,
This that's right.
To make sure.
No, I mean specifically while
This
traveling,
is
to take everything out
reflective,
of the
so
water.
here's the
It was just bare to begin with.
I mean, I don't need to look at this current drawings and like, these are all I know we have two stories, but these two are here, you see this surface of the light or the bollard. They're like two, like, I mean, from upper floor, like making sound. These are gonna be
What they're
So
on.
here's,
Yeah.
here's site plan, here's landscape, here's a full set of current drawings.
Well, except,
Oh, this is final.
Great, one application demolition.
But it's like.
It's not that I can't dairy, what I understand.
Because I have a few prescriptions, but I didn't really bother what's underneath
Like,
this?
this point, this is a good.
The yellow, underneath the yellow cover sheet.
Technically not lit.
That's
So
the
to put it light,
that's a street.
cover sheet.
That's a streetscape. That's the.
I think this is the following documents, concept views, building elevations, existing and proposed streetscape.
Well, that's
So
taking
now we have that like this, and these.
the guy driving around.
I'm assuming that you guys.
That's the same guy.
No.
Never know, never shows up.
This is all.
Is it possible?
A3, it's like for like 6 months.
General store with sort of the.
But I just have 3D prints.
3D copies are the deal, streetscapes front facade as of February 21st. So then the next question is, the remaining set.
what the landscape proposed were.
The other most recent represented by
So, one of the things we looked into is the plan.
This was what was handed out at
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
the workshop.
Trees for trims, to ask for planting recommendations, riparian buffers along the street, so that's sort of.
December 13th. And these are all the elevations.
February 14th was our last workshop. February 14th was the workshop.
Is this the same as that? Because
The only thing that's different is the primary facade changed the upper window.
is that the only thing she changed?
Because this.
Well, we can ask her.
No, it's just.
I'm gonna be able to do that.
Give that to, do you have that, this? Do you have this?
Which set is that?
That's
This is from the workshop, from the 14th.
Do you have
That's the
general
set.
access?
Yeah.
You just took from me.
That's the one I got.
Are you?
Oh, I have, yeah, I took one left.
Oh, this is all the cut sheets.
Yeah, exactly.
Third out, put it in a truck and take it away.
All right. I guess, can I ask everybody to sit down so that we can move on? We'll wait for our official.
I'm back, we can go.
So, with that, I will now open it up to, for public comment, and this is both on the secret application as well as the certificate of appropriateness application. So with that, comments. And again, please state your name and address for the record.
Mr. McCaffrey?
You did.
I think you did.
I have questions for you. Is that okay? Stephanie Hawkins, 15 Academy Street. I'm interested to know there's let's see, I'm wondering what order to, sorry. So the applicant has said that no historic fabric remains, and that the,
Well,
Not, no, very little.
very little, sorry. I even wrote it in quotes, and that's really not what you said, sorry. The very little historic fabric remains. And I'm wondering does our code have an empirical definition of historic fabric? And I'm gonna just go through my questions. And is the existence of historic fabric the value of the sole value of our historic district? Or does sort of the dimension of a building or its features contribute to that value? And I was sort of wondering how that factors into the question of demolition. So that's part one, it's sort of about the demolition question. And then about the streetscape, the applicant proposes that in the event that the application to demolish is granted, that the new construction will be moved east 5 feet and that there will be a gap, and the gap will resolve a certain problem that has been identified, the water runoff from the roof. And I propose that there are other ways to manage water off a roof than a 5-foot gap. Well, I think it's probably very, convenient, you can move through it and whatever, you can use the space. But I wonder, does such a 5-foot gap exist elsewhere on our main streetscape in a way that makes this sort of consistent with what we've been looking at? And
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, okay.
Next to the building that was Mominia, and
Oh, right, and the
100 years.
similarly facaded, okay. And I'm interested to know, is the facade raised on, I noticed that the sort of, doing the before and proposed after comparisons of the facade, the facade is raised, and I'm interested to know, is that because the whole height of the building is being increased, or are you raising that front facade to its original original height that it was in like the mid-1800s, I guess?
Shall I
I guess,
respond?
yeah.
Sorry, I guess that's for the question for the applicant.
Right.
Sorry, I'm mixing my metaphors.
Okay. So I guess let's start with the last question first, since that's, the point of raising I guess that front parapet wall higher, is that because of interior design efforts, or was that an aesthetic decision?
It's mostly based on the interior design and the design, it's mostly based on the interior design of the new structure. So the existing building, right now has very low ceiling heights, and as many old buildings do. So that's not an excuse. However, in building a new structure where we have to meet current codes and fire separations, we have minimum ceiling height requirements, we have fire separation, and the structure of the building, just automatically, everything becomes incrementally bigger. Floor joists that were once 2x8s are now 2x10s or 12s. So things become incrementally bigger. So part of it is out of necessity to meet code requirements. Part of it is out of desire. If we're designing and building a new structure, we want a space that's comfortable and meets the goals of the program for the new building. So it's a combination of all those things, but we also looked very carefully at how it relates to the building immediately next door. And yes, it is slightly higher, but we feel that that is in keeping with the streetscape, because as you go up the street, not only does the elevation rise, but the next building up the block is significantly higher. So, we looked at that on the streetscape, I don't need to pull it out, but that's the gist of it. Can I also respond to the roof drainage?
The what?
The roof drainage question?
Well, no, and I'll tell you the reason why, is that, that sounds like a planning, board issue, which I'm sure the planning
It's also
board
a
will
design issue
handle
outside.
during their.
It's a
design issue as well.
It's
I guess
also a
I'm-
save the building issue.
Yeah, I'm
if you
actually,
build next to it.
thank you, I am interested, the reason I refer to it is exclusively for, I'm sorry, cause I shouldn't have, I realize now I shouldn't have added the commentary about it. I'm simply interested to know if that visual experience on our streetscape is something that's consistent with what exists
When
I
you're going
know,
like
but-
this, you mean the parapet? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, when I'm going like this, I mean the dimension, the flat dimension of the front of the building where because there's a proposal that the building will be moved over 5 feet.
Oh, you
And
mean
there will be-
continuous
Yeah,
facade?
and yes, and elsewhere, the block further to the left or further to the west is they're all, right immediately next to each other. And most of the buildings on Main Street are, either share a wall or are close enough to have the appearance of sharing a wall and so I was just wanting you to tell me if that was consistent with the streetscape experience.
I think it varies on Main Street, from the alley, next to Country Goose, to masonry buildings that do indeed have shared walls, to buildings that sit sort of close but not exactly. There isn't a single building spacing on Main Street. Part of that's development pattern, part of it is fires and rebuilding after fires. We're sort of a hodgepodge.
Okay.
And I think, I mean, if I were designing a building that had no constraints, I would never do what that is, but I recognize the fact that Karen wound up repeating that in order to capture a character-defining feature on the existing building. And that is certainly one of the most visually obvious part of the existing building, as you walk up and down the street. So, I think that was something which, even though I didn't aesthetically like it, I thought was necessary.
The gap.
No, well, the gap is necessary, but for other reasons. I thought we were talking about the front.
Oh, sorry, okay, and
Front
the height
facade.
of the parapet. There
Okay.
there's two things. In terms of gap, I think if you stand on different places on Main Street, you're gonna see different things.
Any other comments? Going once.
Phil, you've sat here, it's 11:30, you have nothing to say?
I have a couple of concerns about Backbrook and access to it, but that's to be taken up probably in planning. But I would like to say that I think overall it is an improved use of the property that has suffered from benign neglect for over 100 years, or, not really thinking it through. And I do realize it's of great historic value, but right now we're in another century, and I think this is a significant upgrade of the streetscape experience that you would get. So I like it.
Could I ask
Yes.
another question? Has the village, has the engineer, you actually forgive me? It's really late, so please, if I'm repeating myself, please forgive me. Did the can you confirm for me that the engineer that the village retained did confirm that the fabric is in such condition that it cannot be, I guess, renovated without undue cost? And I really, if I asked this question like 5 minutes ago, please forgive me.
There was the village's consultant, Silman,
Yeah.
did review the structure
Mhm.
of the property and concurred with the applicant's structural engineer that it was the cost of, renovating the existing building was fairly burdensome, and given all of the alterations that have occurred in the past.
Actually,
Was that the question?
I don't see Silman commenting on cost, because that's not a question,
not-
that was before the structural engineer. What I see the structural engineer commenting on is condition. Overall, the building structure is in fair to poor condition. Deterioration of the heavy timber as well as modifications to accommodate new window openings and other changes have compromised the structure. Repairs have been made at several locations, such as at the sills. Repairs that have been made, such as at sills, have helped stabilize the structure that have resulted in the loss of original components of the structure. Our specific observations of the condition of the structure are captured in the captions that accompany the photos at the end. Recommendations: the traditional heavy timber brace frame structure that is part of the original south portion of the building should be salvaged and reused in the renovated structure as noted in Ms. Park's Building Alternatives Report. To assess the extent of the frame that can be incorporated in the new building, we recommend that the interior and exterior finishes be removed, the frame be documented, and the condition of the timber be evaluated. In the case where the deterioration in the timber is too advanced to practically salvage any material, sufficiently detailed documentation should be completed as part of the written history of the building and development at 126 Main Street. So there's nothing about cost in their
I'm
assessment.
sorry, I missed it.
But the other thing to keep in mind, Stephanie, is that we also sent all of this stuff up to SHPO, and they sent back a letter essentially saying the same sort of thing.
Thank you.
All right, yes. Oh, were you
No,
gonna
I'm
comment?
just
Stretch in.
All right,
flapping my
then.
arms.
Okay, so with that, do I have a motion to close the public hearing for both secret and certificate of appropriateness?
I would move to close the public hearing for both purposes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so I have a motion to close the secret hearing for both, or to close the public hearing for both secret and the certificate of appropriateness. With that, I'll take a roll call vote.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I know everybody's
No.
tired, that's part of the JOB. I have a question for the village attorney. The element that concerns me, in this environmental review, I'm trying to find my glasses so I can see you, is that the reference to in the structural engineer's report, both Silman and Mike Carr's structural assessment, the reference is to framing, and not to foundation. And it would appear that the building alternatives, all three of the building alternatives that were presented go forward on the notion that the foundation has failed. And my concern is that element has not been, that the focus has been heavily on the frame and not on the foundation. Yes, the foundation walls are in very poor condition, I understand, but the alternatives put forward in the September memorandum, which I just had and now is in my piles of paper, that Karen produced in September, go forward on the assumption that the foundation continues to be failed, right? So so alternative A, renovate existing structure and add building addition. Pros laid out, cons laid out. The building would continue to rest on a deteriorating foundation. Alternative B, remove westerly stairway. And again, it says the building will continue to rest on a deteriorating foundation. Alternative C, demolition and new construction. Obviously, we know what happens there. So I guess, while we know from the environmental review that option C mitigates that alternative, I don't feel confident that alternatives A and B have explored the option of what happens if you have a repaired foundation and you go from there in your assumptions about impact. So I don't know that the questions that you would pursue to answer that are, I don't think necessarily if you were to say that there is a positive impact and you catapult into expanded environmental impact, that those questions are answered, but that those questions could be answered in considerations about demolition and rebuilding. So I'm not sure exactly the question I'm asking, but I'm saying that as a reviewer, I see that as a weakness in the assessment that we need to do something with, but I don't think that catapulting into an expanded environmental review answers that question.
I don't think that the expanded environmental review has anything to do with it. I think that resting one's case on the reuse of the foundation, even if it is greatly improved, is kind of the tail wagging the dog. Because I think part of the objective here is to create that separation between the buildings, which, if not done, both of these buildings will have a good failure point, both Silver Spoon and this building. Yeah, and they will just continue to deteriorate and get worse. So I think the only way you do that, I'm looking at the dimensions of the existing building and the proposed building, and taking into account that 5'2" alleyway, it requires that the building shift 2 feet to the east.
Well,
And-
but the recommendation of Silman
Mhm.
is focused on that center core, which is the original portion of the building. And in any case, both the architectural historian and our consultant talked about the removal of a portion of the structure to mitigate that exact issue, right? That you remove the addition that now contains the stairwell, and you retain the historic core. Now, I know that's not a perfect solution, and it doesn't address problems, but it does potentially retain fabric, and it creates a separation. This brings me to my original question, which is, have we sufficiently explored that option that brings us to what feels like an inevitable conclusion that full demolition is the only answer here?
Well, I think this is something to consider. Part of what we have determined to be the character defining features of this building that we would want to see carried on in new construction are its treatment as a building that's been modified to become an Italianate building. If that section is removed and only the original core of the building remains, how would those proportions affect the continuation of it being a modified Italianate building?
And would you not contemplate, I mean, it becomes a question of what remains, right? I mean,
It does become a question of what remains, because right now, part of what we are considering to be historic fabric that we would like to see remain is the cornice of the building, which we know is a later addition to the building, but it's also a exterior, it's a visible exterior piece of historic fabric. Beyond that, the historic fabric in the building that's worth saving is all interior framing fabric. And I guess some of the foundations as well, anything that would be above grade, which is very little. So I'm not disputing your concerns about whether or not the building could be modified in place by removing, you know, what is essentially that stairwell that connects it to the building next door, but I also think that to take it a couple of steps, you know, widening the focus, if that were to be a route that we went down, then how would that affect the ability to incorporate or continue to use some of the actual
Right,
historic
do you end up
fabric
with
that
a-
we have?
Do you end up with a truncated version of,
Yeah, because once you take off that hall and the portions of the building get narrower, but nothing else is done to the height or anything else, it kind of goes back to being this sort of weird colonial building that should be oriented into the garden and not onto Main Street. And then I mean, something about this building that I've been thinking about a lot is there's the history to the building, there's the decades and centuries old history to the building, but there's also kind of the understanding of a building that people have seen for who are still alive and walking around. So I think that that to me would encourage a reconstruction or the life to continue forward in its current architectural style, which is an Italian style.
well, and I guess, so the first question we have to ask is the seeker question, and whether we,
Okay, finish your statement, and then I just need to.
And then I'll
throw in
tell you why
something.
you're wrong.
and then you'll tell me why I'm wrong. I want to be clear that I'm not unaware that we're not talking about an unmodified, perfect building. We've talked about it before, but for the benefit of the public who are here, we're in the happy circumstance of being a district that's 30-plus years old, and many of the gems have been restored and lovingly treated, and we're getting down to the buildings that are built of lesser quality from the beginning, or have been neglected over time and need to be addressed and dealt with. So we're gonna come to this stage eventually where we have to deal with a building that has a great deal of history, but not a great deal of integrity. And it's sort of like the human body, that are you the person who came forth from your mother's womb because all of your cells have replaced themselves? There isn't a lot of fabric left, and what's there is cut up and chopped up and changed. I guess I'm wanting to make sure that I'm responsibly voting and understanding that we have, as we are meant to do, explored the options, the three options as we should have, or have we simply said, here's an option, but here's the option we're gonna go with?
Well, and the statement that I wanted to make is that I think that I don't agree with how you're characterizing Silman's report, because even though in the text of the report, he talks primarily about the timber framing above grade, he does in fact have a photograph, and he says brickstone and CMU comprise the foundation walls. CMU was used to fill in where presumably window openings, upper right in the image, and the door on the left. Generally the masonry is in fair to poor condition. Sills along this wall have been replaced. So obviously, I think even though he doesn't talk about it in his report, I think he supports what Michael Carr said about the foundation walls, where he says that they're in poor condition. And, I think that it becomes.
Well, and practically large sections of it have been infilled with
block.
a block, yeah.
And the only part which is even worth talking about to any extent is in fact that original block, because then the back part is sitting almost on top of grade, and it's the same sort of condition that we had at 35 Market Street, where the water is wicking up into the framing. And so, it becomes a question of, realistically, what is it that we're saying? I mean, certainly, the block that was used to fill up the openings is not historic fabric. So, the brick foundation walls, which still remain, and actually, if I remember correctly, in Mike Carr's report, he says the original foundations were actually stone, and the brick was used to bring it up to grade. And there are, significant problems with the wall. I mean, the photographs show, the issues that they're dealing with. And I just have a hard time feeling like it's a part of the historic fabric that is worth sort of jumping through hoops to save.
So,
I think moreover, if one were to take away that side addition, which is not 5'2" wide, it's wider than that, and you were to somehow restore that foundation and build on that foundation's footprint, you'd have a building that's only 19 feet wide. Okay, so you would have fewer choices in terms of laying out the interiors, both in the commercial and in the apartment above. But there's one issue I wanna take, there's one point that I wanna take issue with. I don't believe this building was ever oriented to the side, because in 1838, Main Street was straightened. Main Street used to go, used to pass the back side of the C&E Paint Building, which was the old Methodist church. It was built in 1833. And that then finally swung back towards where Main Street is at the corner of Kemble and Main. So that straightened part dates from about 1838 or 1840. So this building was oriented towards Main Street, not towards the side yard at all.
no, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that we were back at that. I thought we'd moved on from that. That also, the point you just raised brings you back to, with a 19-foot wide remaining core,
Mm-hmm.
that brings you back to moving in the other direction, building in the other direction. And then again, you're modifying that original block anyway. So you expose it on one side and you cover it on another, so.
Or you build the building deeper, or whatever you do, but it's, it would result in I think a building that would be less appropriate for Main Street. And this comes closer to a Main Street paradigm.
All right, so last time I remember, we had a motion to close the public hearing on both secret and the certificate of appropriateness. So, do we have any other discussion before we take a vote? Okay. Sean,
Yes.
Andrea,
Yes.
Caroline,
Mm. Can I say maybe?
you can abstain if you want.
Yeah, I'll abstain.
She's, so, one abstention. Kathleen?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, so public hearing is closed, public comment is closed. So with that, we'll now proceed with the secret neg deck, negative declaration portion. I get to read another long document.
Would you like somebody else to read who reads faster than you?
If you wish, I would be more than happy to turn over the neg deck reading duties to you. All right.
Okay. State Environmental Quality Review Act, negative declaration, notice of determination of non-significance, date 21st February 2018, lead agency, Village of Cold Spring Historic District Review Board, 85 Main Street, Cold Spring, New York, 10516. This notice is issued pursuant to Part 617 of the implementing regulations pertaining to Article 8, State Environmental Quality Review Act, secret of the Environmental Conservation Law. The Historic District Review Board of the Village of Cold Spring, as lead agency, has determined that the proposed action described herein will not have a significant adverse environmental impact on the draft environmental impact statement, EIS, is not necessary. Name of action, 126 Main Street, replacement of existing historic building. Applicant SCGY Properties LLC. Secret status, type 1, located within a federal state designated historic
Talk to
district.
you later.
Condition, negative declaration, no. Description of action, the application is for the demolition of existing two-story structure and to replace it with a similar sized new two-story structure. The subject property is located within the village's general business zoning district and currently contains retail on the first floor and one apartment on the second floor. The current uses are not changing. The subject property is also located within both a National Register Historic District and the village's historic district. Location, 126 Main Street, Cold Spring, New York, 10516. Section block lot 48.8-2-48. Reasons supporting this determination. The Historic District Review Board of the Village of Cold Spring has carefully considered the information submitted by the applicant as well as comments and correspondence received from the public and other agencies. The Historic District Review Board has reviewed the project using criteria provided in section 617.7 of the SECRET and has determined that this action will not result in any significant adverse environmental impacts for the following primary reasons. Roman 1. There will be no substantial adverse change in existing air quality, ground or surface water quality or quantity, traffic or noise levels, a substantial increase in solid waste production, a substantial increase in potential for erosion, flooding, leaching, or drainage problems. The proposal involves the redevelopment of an existing site. Soil erosion control measures have already been specified on the plans provided by the applicant's consultant. Any approval granted will include a condition that the erosion control devices be installed and regularly inspected and maintained before and during construction until such time the work is finished and the site is stabilized. This will ensure that all the eroded material during construction is captured and does not flow off-site or into the nearby stream. In addition, the applicant is proposing to replace most of the impervious parking area that currently exists with a pervious surface. There will be no removal or destruction of large quantities of vegetation or fauna, substantial interference with the movement of any resident or migratory fish or wildlife species, impacts on a significant habitat area, substantial adverse impacts on a threatened or endangered species of animal or plant, or the habitat of such species, or other significant adverse impacts to natural resources. The .229 acre project site is developed and located on the village's main street in a, it says suburban, but I will say urban, setting surrounded by similarly scaled development. The New York Natural Heritage Program identified the potential for the following threatened or endangered species to exist within the project area: bald eagle, fence lizard, short-nosed sturgeon, Atlantic sturgeon, timber rattlesnake, and northern long-eared bat. However, follow-up correspondence with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation indicates that suitable habitat does not exist on the project site for the fence lizard or timber rattlesnake. In addition, the project site does not contain suitable habitat for either sturgeon species. Therefore, no impacts are anticipated to these species. The proposed project involves the removal of 6 Norway maple trees and invasive species. To avoid impacts to the northern long-eared bat and the bald eagle, and per recommendation of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, all tree clearing will occur in March 2018. Number 3, there will be no impairment of the environmental characteristics of a critical environmental area as designated pursuant to subdivision 617.14G of the park. Number 4, there will be no creation of a material conflict with the community's current plans or goals as officially approved or adopted. The proposal eliminates the existing building and replaces it in kind with one of similar scale and size. The proposal is consistent with the village's comprehensive plan in that 1, it calls for an impervious surface, and actually impervious is incorrect. It calls for a pervious surface for most of the parking area, which allows for infiltration, which can minimize flooding. And 2, submitted a landscape plan for the area adjacent to the adjoining brook with the goal of stabilizing the stream bank and further reducing erosion. Number 5, there will be no impairment of the character or quality of important historical, archaeological, architectural, or aesthetic resources of the existing community or neighborhood character. The proposal seeks to replace an existing mixed-use building with a new mixed-use building of similar size, profile, scale, design, and function. In fact, the applicant proposes to relocate the building location slightly so that the new building is aligned with other existing buildings on this portion of Main Street. As part of the proposed project, the applicant would photo document the exterior of the structure prior to demolition, as well as during demolition, paying particular attention to the hand-sawn framing construction. The building will be recorded, parentheses, documented, close paren, during dismantling. In addition, the applicant conducted an archaeological field survey and no historic period or prehistoric sites were encountered. Thus, there will be no significant adverse historical, archaeological, or aesthetic impacts that warrant the preparation of a DEIS. However, this secret finding does not necessarily establish that the proposal is appropriate under the village's historic district regulations. Through the underlying certificate of appropriate approval process with the HDRB, the applicant will attempt to retain exterior architectural features and ensure compatibility with the historic character of the neighborhood. As discussed above, the applicant has proposed to disassemble significant elements of the building and photograph the important features if the demolition is approved. The applicant has also committed to incorporate materials from the historic building into the new building to link the new with the old if approved. Number 6, there will be no major change in the use of either the quantity or type of energy. Number 7, there will be no creation of a hazard to human health. Number 8, there will be no substantial change in the use or intensity of use of land, including agricultural, open space, or recreational resources, or in its capacity to support existing uses. Number 9, there will be no encouraging or attracting a large number of people to a place or places for more than a few days compared to the number of people who would come to such place absent the action. Number 10, there will be no creation of a material demand for other actions that would result in one of the above consequences. Number 11, there will be no changes in 2 or more elements of the environment, no one of which has a significant impact on the environment, but when considered together result in a substantial adverse impact on the environment. Or, number 12, this action is not related to 2 or more related actions undertaken, funded, or approved by an agency, none of which has or would have a significant impact on the environment, but when considered cumulatively, would meet one or more of the criteria in the subdivision. In conclusion, it should be noted that the Historic District Review Board's secret findings above only relate to whether this action will result in any significant adverse environmental impacts that require the preparation of a DEIS. Each reviewing village board will conduct its own analysis to determine whether the proposal meets its specific standards. And then we go on to, for further information, contact Alice Polinsky. Copies of this negative declaration have been sent to Cold Spring Planning Board, Cold Spring Zoning Board of Appeals, interested agencies, New York State Historic Preservation Office, Village of Cold Spring Village Board, applicant owner circulation, SCGY Properties LLC, etc. And a notice of this type 1 negative declaration will also be published in the Environmental Notice Bulletin, E&B, published by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's so quick, you're gonna have to change the date and reread it.
That's true. Do I have any other revisions other than those that were already noted?
Item 5, there will be no permanent impairment. There will be of the character or quality while the building's down, obviously. There'll be no permanent impairment.
Actually, in number
Anybody?
5, it talks about relocating the building so that the new building is aligned with other existing buildings on this portion of Main Street. The front alignment, I think, never was in question. I think it's the
Right,
side one.
it's, am I correct, we're talking about moving the building back
Back
to
about a
what?
half foot or so.
Right.
Oh, it is actually moving back?
It's
Because
actually
of the
approaching
property
into the
ownership.
street a little bit.
All right, does anybody have any objection to inserting the word permanent in, between no, or the permanent between no and impairment?
No.
Where are you?
5, first sentence. No permanent impairment? Any objections?
Nope.
Okay, any other changes?
Just in the second paragraph of number 2, we changed suburban to urban,
Yeah, changed that already.
and in the
Okay.
second paragraph
Pervious.
of 4, we changed pervious to impervious. And in on the first page, type 1, located, for the secret status, it should say type 1, located within a federal state designated historic district.
As opposed to 2.
Yeah, as opposed to whatever.
Just to
language.
backtrack on number 5, so you're talking about right by Roman numeral number 5?
Mm-hmm.
That's all, that's right out of the regulations,
Okay.
so if you wanna maybe put in a comment section underneath,
No.
Well, the essence of that idea is captured in the next paragraph, so if you don't feel comfortable with that change, I understand the logic for the why.
Right.
But it does need to be correct that it's resources of the existing, not for existing. In number 5, that typo is corrected.
Any other Going once, going twice. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the declaration as modified?
I move to approve the declaration as modified.
And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Carolyn?
Yes,
Kathleen?
Recognizing the mitigations presented, yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Andrea? And yes. All right, so these are the markups that, okay, so, the neg deck is approved. We will now, if you wish, Ashley, we can turn you loose because, you know, the secret part is over. We're getting ready, but you're more than welcome to hang in there and listen to us haggle
drive to
over
Stanford at midnight.
details.
Yeah, I do have an early morning meeting tomorrow, so I'm gonna take it.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Ashley.
Thank you.
Okay, so do we have any discussion concerning we've got two certificate of appropriatenesses to do. The first one is demolition of the existing, and I guess, you know, is there any reason why we can't combine the two? I mean, realistically, we're talking about demolishing the building and building a new building.
Because they're two separate applications, right?
They are currently two separate applications.
I understand that, but is there any reason why we can't combine them
Just for
What's-
voting purposes, or?
What's the reason to do
Yeah.
it?
for voting purposes? Good.
It's
Do
another
we-
5 minutes at this point.
Okay,
so
all right.
what do you send to the building inspector if it were just a demolition?
You can
Is
knock
there a
it down.
demolition drawing?
Well, yes, there is.
Yes.
Usually there is a set of demolition
There's a demo
plans.
plan and wherever that is.
If it's two applications, I would just do two separate
Okay,
permits.
all right.
Just to make it
try.
easier.
All right, so the first one is we have an application for demolition of the existing building. Is there any discussion before we have a vote?
I need to ask a question.
Yes, ask a question.
Sorry. No, it's always me who has to ask the question, but I'm gonna make sure I understand. There is a hardship, there is a hardship element of our ordinance,
Mhm.
the current ordinance, that only, comes into play
Kicks in.
if a demolition were approved, were denied, and the applicant were to say, that's a taking. They would need to demonstrate,
Yeah, there's specific
Hardship.
economic factors.
but
Right.
that does not come into play.
Actually, just to clarify, it doesn't say the hardship, certificate of economic hardship is not specific to demolition, it's specific to any action of the board.
Correct.
Right.
Thank you.
So technically, the economics doesn't play a factor in the C of A itself.
Okay. Just clarifying for
Okay.
record.
So do I have a motion to approve the C of A for the demolition?
Yeah, that needs to be the-
Yes, subject to all the mitigation that's,
Are cited in the, let me write that down, to all the mitigation cited in the secret approval.
yeah, regarding the documentation and the filing with the library and Putnam History Museum and the reuse of those materials or either in the building or for sale or whatever.
And then, on that point, I have another question.
Okay.
On page 5 of Ms. Ciello's report, the architectural consultant hired by the applicant, she gave a list of items that she recommended be salvaged and reused. Some of them are exterior elements,
Which tab is that?
tab
312.
ATT 3.12, page 5. The exterior items are, well, the sheathing materials, the wide plank siding at the west wall, the bracketed front cornice, the bay window brackets and trim, the bay window interior panel beneath the windows, foundation bricks and stones, although they're not technically visible, right? And rafters and unpainted beams. The rest of the elements on the list are interior features, which we do not normally discuss because they're not visible to public rights of way. However, I'm asking the question to you in the case where, as part of seeker process, these elements have been identified as
Historic.
significant and would help tell the story of the building. Can these elements be included as part of conditions? I mean, some of them, like the slop, there's a slop sink here. I don't know how you would enforce the reuse of a slop sink. But things like floorboards, interior and exterior doors,
As long as they're willing to agree with it, I think they proposed it, correct?
no, they're not necessarily proposing it. Their
Okay.
consultant is identifying these items as recommended to be salvaged and reused, either within the building or sold for reuse elsewhere.
Oh, okay.
So I guess the question to Karen and Susan, do you have any objection to including this as far as the mitigation elements?
So our intention is to salvage whatever we can from the building and try to reuse it for interior elements. We obviously can't guarantee that we will use every door or the kitchen sink or the slop sink, but that's what we're gonna try to do. And then whatever we can't, we talked with Mr. Brennan about finding another use for it, that someone else might be interested in some of the lumber that possibly isn't long enough for us or, wouldn't work. He also talked about if there were brackets at the top of the building, we take them down, and that we can't reuse them, that he could reconstruct using some of the lumber from the framing. So it's hard to say, yes, we absolutely are gonna use all the floorboards and we absolutely are gonna use all the joists, because we don't know what's gonna happen when
When
we
you start taking it
disassemble
apart.
the building. But our intention is to, yes, use as much as we can, and certainly not throw in the dumpster things that we can't use, but find a home for it. And I guess that's just a trust thing, I don't
Well,
know if you
it's-
wanna
there's
be out
also-
there and.
There's also quite a number of architectural salvage places in the region.
Right, and Carla has given us a lot of resources about if we don't use a material, where could it go? So we're gonna make a best faith effort to use as much as we can, and what we can't use, someone else will use. I don't know how else to put that.
The greatest practical extent.
To the
Yeah.
greatest
practical
practical
extent.
extent.
Well, what's most important to me is those elements on her list which are currently visible from public rights of way.
And the console sink. We know you
And I
want
love
that.
but I know you're gonna use that. You're gonna use this.
We know you want
It's got
that
the
sink.
This is
soap
all-
tray and
That's where you're
everything.
going with this, Kath.
The legs.
No, but I mean, in terms of the wood
You said it
objects,
all.
because old wood is just so valuable in terms of
Right.
its grain and everything, and it's so tight compared to modern wood. It's not necessarily just an architectural type thing, but it might be able to be used by artists or people who make some furniture or something like that. So, I mean, it's certainly one, it's almost like if you took something that old and you just put it in a dumpster, it's almost sinful,
Right.
I mean, it's not only an ecological thing,
I
it's.
probably would not have thought that 10 months ago, but seriously, that's one of the things I've come to learn and value a little bit more than I did before we started this.
And the crime
that's
in the
happy
building comes
news.
down.
Well, we do, I mean, the next step of this process would be approving this construction plan, and in the construction plan, it specifically says that the cornice brackets and dental molding from the existing building are gonna be reused, and the brackets from the bay window are gonna be reused. Those are the two elements that we were most insistent upon. I don't know how many of these other things we can, from Carla's list, we can specify be used on the exterior of the building, because I mean,
The plank,
I don't think that we're asking them to reuse them on the exterior. I think that they be salvaged.
right.
and used on site to the extent possible.
And, yeah, they're salvaged and used on site as much as possible. So, any other,
Caveats
yeah,
to our motion?
okay, do I have a motion to approve the certificate of appropriateness for?
Carolyn made the motion
Wait,
already.
you gotta approve the demolition first, I think.
That's what, yeah, the certificate of appropriateness for the demolition.
But didn't Sean move it already?
No, Carolyn
No,
moved it.
Carolyn made
Carolyn.
You need a second?
No, in a second. I thought Carolyn moved it when you said, as long as it's subject to all the seeker,
No, that was still part of discussion.
Discussion.
Okay.
okay.
Okay,
We're
so
all-
do
we're
I
all
have a
tired.
motion?
I'll move to accept, the application, given the modifications, that we just outlined.
Do I have a second?
Okay, I'll second it.
Okay. With that, we'll vote. Andrea? This is demolition.
Yeah, yeah.
Kathleen?
Recognizing the case-by-case nature
Yes.
of all applications across the district, but in particular, requests for demolition, recognizing the painful nature of a vote like this on an historic review board. However, understanding fully the issue of integrity on this historic building. It is historic, it has lost much of its integrity. I will vote to support.
Sean?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Yeah.
I vote yes. All right, so demolition's approved. Okay, so now we're dealing with the building. And I guess my question is that, what do we have on the 28th?
Is it the boulevard?
We have it's a workshop, I don't know who's
We
on
have the
schedule.
Boulevard and 24 Pine Street for a workshop.
24 Pine Street.
Not Pine, Parsonage.
Parsonage.
Okay.
That's all I know of right now.
All right, because what, my thought was that we, put off the new building until then, since it's already after midnight, or do we wanna press on and?
Well, nothing has changed as far as I can tell from the drawings that we reviewed with Karen last week or 2 weeks ago.
Yes, there was just one tiny change,
Over the transom.
The transom over the door, which was
yeah, because there's
my
the,
request.
there's
Okay.
there's the February 14th set,
Yeah, that's perfect.
and then there's the one front elevation that has that transom change, which is dated February 21st.
Right.
So if we just rip off page A3 from the February 14th set and substitute page A3, I think we're done,
Okay,
right?
let me just make sure I have the drawings that we are talking about.
Those are the ones we pulled
You
out
just
right
distributed
before.
it.
Paper here. Okay, so, do we have any discussion concerning the changes?
No, it's much improved. That larger transom over the
Okay,
front
so-
doors are much improved.
So this is the set dated February 14th, and
And
Mhm.
A3 is dated February 21st.
Okay, well, which means we change A3, the one that was issued today.
The one that was issued today is February 23rd.
Yeah. This. Okay. All right, so those are the drawings. Now, we also have, right now, as part of the package, the window catalog cuts, the light fixtures, the doors, and the fence.
Do we have clarification from Karen on the material for the door? We questioned last time, all
That the-
engineered, all wood.
Right.
Yeah.
And the panels are Interbond, whatever that is.
So it is engineered wood with a wood veneer. It isn't it isn't a solid fir door. So the wood, it is a wood door, but the wood stiles and rear rails, the engineered part is, a finger jointed engineered wood.
Is it what?
A finger jointed engineered wood, solid wood, not a plywood, and that is within a wood veneer.
All right, so in other words, they took pieces and they finger jointed them all together.
Correct.
Which would be the same, I mean, if you were to get a all wood Marvin window, it would be the same technique.
But there aren't, unless I'm understanding styles wrong. What, is that this?
That's a rail.
So
This
which
is
the style is here?
Yeah. And basically what they're saying is
Rails
that
are just
it's not
Yeah.
one
Like a
solid
railing
piece of
and
wood
it's
all the way up.
Style like a muntin.
Oh.
I just had the wrong word in my head.
Okay, any other questions? Let's do it this way. Any other questions concerning the building?
As opposed to,
Well, all of the catalog cuts,
Oh.
not, now that we addressed the door question we had last time, the
All right.
material question.
the fence,
I would just say, because I don't think it's, oh, it is, okay. Just that the current signage is FPO, but it says it in the note.
Yeah, the signage is to be submitted.
what's to be submitted?
The
sign, it
signage,
says it at the end of the note.
it's the signage to be submitted under separate application, this signage up here.
Okay. No other questions?
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the application as submitted?
So moved.
Second,
Okay, with, I guess really no modifications, I didn't hear of any changes
What
that.
about the trans that we're
Flipping out this,
That's,
Well, no,
that's
that's already,
reflected on
that
the
was
drawing.
part
Oh,
of the,
that- oh, you
yeah,
were- okay, I
that's
see.
part of it.
sorry.
Okay, so therefore I'm calling for a vote, Sean?
I think that this is the result of a lot of really hard work and understanding, so I'm really happy with it, I vote yes.
Andrea?
yes,
Kathleen?
grateful for the time and commitment and the appreciation you've shown for the district, I will vote yes.
Carolyn?
the design has evolved a great deal since we first saw it, and I think it's, all to the better, yes.
And I vote yes. Got it.
Thank you all.
Okay,
Thank you.
do you have the DEC letter to put in the file?
I have a copy of it, but I'll take all the copies and then, this goes in the secret file.
Yes.
Yeah.
I forgot to ask you a question, it's neither here nor there. Who enforces this, the DEC regulations about tree cutting?
I guess it would be the building inspector or the local municipality to make sure that they cut it.
Not the tree committee?
No,
They're
the
not,
tree
they're
committee,
private trees.
they can't do private property, they can only do trees.
I mean, it's technically the DEC, so what would happen is a building inspector would call the DEC, but on
The
something
DEC
like,
would swoop in and
on something
do
like
what it
this.
is the DEC does.
Yeah, I mean, usually, when you're talking about clear cutting like 10 acres, you
Right.
know, they'll notice that, and,
Right.
but, I mean, you're talking about a handful of trees, so I guess,
Do we have anywhere in our regs something about cutting trees over a certain diameter in the village code?
some codes do require like
Yeah, I know
tree
this,
cutting
that's why I'm
permits.
asking.
Need a
Motion to adjourn, I move to adjourn with gratitude for everyone's time. Second, somebody?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do you want this set, Al? Do you want
Yes.
one set?
Let me take and I'll have to sort through them all.
It is way past Scotch o'clock.
It is way past
almost
Scotch
time for
o'clock.
breakfast.
We're not kidding.
Have a-
Hopefully not.